Well, hey everybody out there, welcome back to Behind the Pulpit. It is the day after Memorial Day, May the 27th, and we've been absent for a few weeks because we've been doing some stuff. I had some vacation, Pastor Dave was down at a graduation, then we had our annual church network gathering, which we'll chat about. We are back. We got a lot of things to talk about. We're covering the last few weeks of sermons. So we have a Calvinism, Arminianism debate. We have women in ministry. We have Elders and Deacons. Lots of ground to cover. We're going to see if we can do it in under an hour. I don't know, Pastor Dave, what do you think about that? Think we got enough time here?
First of all, nice shirt. Second of all, the first two things are controversial, like, Arminianism, Calvinism, and then obviously women in ministry. The third one, Elders and Deacons, isn't really that hot, is it? Or is that going to be equal?
Well, depending on what you think about the women in ministry, the Elders and Deacons thing might be controversial. It kind of goes together a little bit.
So regarding your attire, is the blue a new offering this year? I don't remember seeing that.
I didn't know we were going here. There we go. Yes, it is a new offering. So let's talk a little bit about that. One of the reasons we were not here last week was we were at our annual VCN Mid-Atlantic gathering. And can you tell people what VCN stands for, Pastor Dave?
Venture Church Network, formerly known as the Conservative Baptist Churches of America. That is our official affiliation. The word venture was chosen because it means advancing in the face of risk or danger. And that's really what we Baptists have been known for. And we want to continue to be known for. Boldly going
where no one has gone before.
And now,
there you go.
I knew Bob would finish that sentence.
That's for John Bucksbaum. By the way, he saw me in the parking lot after Awana one day and mentioned that he has been to James Kirk's birthplace in Iowa. So he'll appreciate the Star Trek shout out.
John, I want to hear about this trip, man.
There you go.
Sounds good.
But anyway, to your question, this is a new shirt. I got it at the gathering. This is our VCN logo right here. And I did not realize
comfy. Yeah.
It is very comfy,
Cotton.
and I didn't realize it was going to be so loud. In fact, we have a guest with us here today who probably is blinded by the brightness of my shirt. To my left, we have, as we learned yesterday, the great Amy Huber. Amy, welcome to the podcast today.
So glad to be here. I wish I had the memo. I'm feeling very drab in my attire.
Well, we need contrast, so this is good.
Okay.
Well, just consider me the accent wall, and you're the base color, okay. I guess.
Deal.
So we're glad you're here with us today, and we got some important things to talk about.
Thank the Lord.
Yes.
We have an expert on the panel here
today.
I know. That'll be helpful.
Fun expert.
We're going to need one. No pressure.
That's right. We're going to do that. Well, before we dive into our topics, why don't we recap? We talked about the VCN gathering, which was great, and we were super excited about all the good things that are happening in the network. But also, we had our Charter Day outreach event, and Amy helped to lead that. So maybe we can do a quick recap. How many sunglasses did we give away at Charter Day, Amy?
I don't know. Tim, I think you ordered the sunglasses, but I know we gave away 520 ice-cold water bottles on a hot and sunny day, and the sunglasses followed suit. I mean, everyone wanted shade and water.
I believe
they did.
I believe we ordered 250 sunglasses.
Okay.
It was a day where water and sunglasses were a big hit because it was quite hot.
But it was beautiful.
It was. We also had a gubernatorial candidate stop by our tent, John Bramnick. Who I didn't realize he's a comedian and he's also our state senator, and he just happened to, he's got a very distinct voice if you've ever seen him. He popped up behind me and was taking some shots on the Papa Shot, and I turned around and said, John Bramnick, that sounds like you. He goes, that's right.
I think it's good to have a sense of humor in politics, right?
I guess you have to if you want to stick in politics, right?
How's his basketball game on a scale of 1 to 10?
You know what? I don't know that he made any baskets, but he was touting his, I think he played for South Plainfield back in the day is what he was saying.
Whoa.
But anyway, he stopped by, and lots of people. It's a great opportunity to reach out to folks that are in the community that might never come to church.
Right, absolutely. We were happy to serve and just let the community know that we are here for them. Yeah, Basking Ridge, I think we had thousands of people that day.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Right.
It was a lot. Well, thanks so much for doing that. And is there anything else we wanted to highlight about Charter Day?
No, I just want to thank everyone who came out and served on a hot day. They were engaging. a lot of families, a lot of kids. We had a chance to also spotlight our Little Footprints Learning Center. We
that's
gave
right.
away a lot of pinwheels and information about our preschool. So it was a great day overall.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Even Pastor Dave was there. He was handing out
there.
stuff, weren't you? Did you keep sunglasses?
I should have snagged a pair before they all
We're
went.
gonna need to order some more. They were
think so.
pretty happening. I walked around with my kids and I saw some of the kids wearing them. So they
I
were
had the
getting some
easy
play.
job because all of the waters had already been distributed. There was no boxes of sunglasses, and so the pack up was
Yeah.
a lot more light than the pack in. So good day.
There you go.
The record for the pop shot though is still standing. So
Tim
next year
Tim got 100 points on the pop shot.
Does that even have 3 digits?
It does. I
Yep.
saw it. I was
Timothy.
There was
What
one
in the
point
world, Tim?
where Bob and I were playing it. I think Bob, Amy, and I went live on Instagram, and I hit 93, which is one short of the previous record, and it really bothered me. So I did it again.
But then he went back and he did get
got
to
100.
triple digits. Yeah, he was like Manute Bol out there, like Wilt Chamberlain. It was impressive.
I don't know that Manute Bull's the right. We'll go with Wilt the Stilt, but I don't know that Manute Bull had any records on anything.
Kareem out there.
Yeah.
I forgot he wasn't good.
No.
Oh,
He was
okay,
very tall.
all right.
Very
Is that
tall.
That's
the
he
son
was
of-
tall.
Is
He
that
was
the-
tall,
is that
tall,
the
but not
father of
good.
Bol
Okay.
Bol? Pastor Dave? There's Bol Bol, which is pretty recent.
Oh man.
Sounds like similar.
I'm not sure if there's a relationship.
All right. Well, let's move on from here. We got a lot to talk about. Before we get to the sermon today, which we're going to dive into, let's talk about what's going on in the news. All right. So I got 3 major stories, 2 that are related, 1 that's not, that I wanted to chat about. So you may remember a few weeks ago we highlighted that there was a bill. Was it the Amber Loving bill? What did you Kim Loving bill? I forget what it was called, the actual title of it. Now, David looked it up. But anyway, it was garnering a lot of press out in Colorado because it was going to, it was supposed to do protection for LGBT folks, but in the course of the bill, if you were a parent that wouldn't address your child by their given name, or you would dead name them, you could potentially have your child taken away from you. And I do think in the final bill that was removed, but the bill did pass the House. Denver Post, the highlight is Colorado lawmakers strip trans rights bill's most controversial provisions before they actually put it in there. But it still is causing some controversy. It did pass the Senate, and there is a camp out there, which I am familiar with because I had a seminary professor who was on the board of it, Camp Idrahaji. Idrahaji. Can you guess what that stands for, Amy? Camp Idrahaji.
Idrahaji. Is there water involved? Hydra?
No.
No.
Well, good guess.
Okay.
But it actually is after a very famous song, Idrahaji. Idrahaji. I'd rather have Jesus. That's
Oh, okay.
That's the name of the camp. But they're getting attacked by the state because basically the law, I can't remember if it's this law or another law, says that they must allow for, if it is so desired by the student, boys to change and girls, to use girls' showers, to room with them if needed, and the camp is now suing through the Alliance Defending Freedom, the state, and this is going to be another big deal. Headline from the Denver Post: Christian summer camp says Colorado will shut it down over their gender policy. Camp Idrahaji separates campers by sex rather than by their gender identity, which violates these new licensing laws.
So it's the Kelly Loving Act.
Kelly Loving Act. I couldn't remember the first name. Yeah.
And just for definitions, it's misgendering or dead naming, which is referring back to the previous name prior to the transition.
Right. So that passed. That's now law in Colorado. We'll see if that gets, I'm sure it'll get challenged. I think there's already parents that are challenging it. I knew some folks out there that were protesting on the Capitol steps. I had a previous professor who's moved on to Michigan who said he would be leading protests if he was out there. So, it's a big deal. And the thing that's concerning for me for both of these things is this coming to a state near you anytime soon? That once things start in other states, is it going to be an incentive for other similarly like-minded states to engage in that, where you can't actually live out biblical convictions. So definitely pray for Camp Idrahaji. If you go to the Alliance Defending Freedom website, I'm sure you can see what they're doing there, and how they're fighting against that. Other thoughts on that?
That's a very big story. We'll watch how things unfold.
Yeah,
That's in the news. News. All right, second news story I wanted to mention is this caught my eye because I've been having some conversations about AI, which you thought it was going away. It's not. It's here. And this headline comes out of Taiwan. And the headline is World's First AI Nurse, Neurabot joins Taiwan hospitals to battle healthcare crisis. Foxconn and NVIDIA are turning Taiwan into a proving ground for AI hospitals. At the heart, a robot nurse named Neurabot. So apparently in Taiwan, and this is where I think some of these things could be good, there's been a huge nursing shortage over there. The nursing staff is exhausted, and this is one way that they're trying to supplement for a very big need that's going out there. The article says, when nurses burn out, robots clock in, and Taiwan hospitals are showing the world how it's done. So I'm not totally sure how I feel about this, partially because I think I can see that there's good application here, but also, I don't know, if I'm dying in the hospital and I have a robot come up to me, it's going to feel a little weird.
I need EQ.
Yeah.
And I need someone with discernment, judgment. I need some features that I don't feel like are programmable.
Yeah.
At least not right now. I don't know.
Although I suppose if you're in there and there's nobody taking care of you because there's a shortage, that's also not good. So, we kind of see it through our very resourced eyes here. But if you were in a country that doesn't have that, this could be a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of controversial because you think of nurses providing the compassionate care in a relational way that is part of the healing journey that I think is important. So how they program AI to respond in a personal way is very curious to me. And I don't know, can it form... I'm just trying to think of what are the dangers of someone replicating the human touch.
Well, I mean, nurses read body language. They sometimes have religious or spiritual support there. There can be convictions. I think some of the practical needs might be okay, but there's definitely some, I feel like, essential human components to nursing care that are going to be challenging to replicate in that fabric. But can I just talk about like what I found out in Atlanta?
Yeah,
this is kind of related to the technology. So, like 2 weeks ago, I was roaming the streets of downtown Atlanta, hanging out near where my daughter graduated, and there's these Waymo cars. And Waymo is a company that is partnering with Uber with driverless cars, and you can call them and get a ride in a car with something on the roof that looks like a big, huge, fancy 3D camera that's always spinning. And this car is navigating busy streets with high traffic and short stops and pedestrians and totally getting around Atlanta with no problem. And I'm watching these Waymo cars. I'm like, oh, maybe there's just one. No. They're swarming the streets of Atlanta trying this new technology out. And I have never seen anything like that before in my life. I think I've seen it on the movies or TV. But like right there's a car going, no car. No one in the car. No driver in the car. It was really mind-blowing to me. So Waymo.
And people were getting in and they were riding.
People were hailing them. It was so bizarre, so mind-blowing. So I don't know if that's where we're headed, but Atlanta's trying it out, and it seems to be working okay. So
yeah.
I think I'd like to observe it from a bird's eye view, not necessarily on the ground.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I thought about calling, but I was a little too scared to ask for a ride. I'm not the
You're not the
the
trendsetter. Yeah.
I'm not the early adopter. I'm somewhere in the middle of the bell curve.
Well, obviously you can see it probably in the urban areas is where it's going to come first. But we'll see. I've seen people say we're going to see a big explosion of stuff in the next 12 to 24 months. Probably in a way that people haven't realized yet. So
you can get the Uber app and you can request a Waymo if you're in Atlanta. I don't know what other cities are doing this, but
yeah.
Have
you seen them has anybody been to New York? Have they been going on? New York's a lot more congested than Atlanta.
Right.
So maybe
I'd like to see this happen in India.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah,
Right.
you know. By the way, I saw a graph the other day of the world's population. 8 billion, 4 billion was in most of the world, and 4 billion was basically India and China.
Right.
It was pretty crazy
Right.
how
Yeah.
the population is distributed.
Right.
So
It's pretty
Yeah.
dense right there.
all right, so keep an eye on the AI news that's coming up, and I think we're going to need to think about that from a Christian worldview even more so in the coming months and years. All right, so we are moving from in the news into the sermon, and Amy brought her a drinking vessel here today with
Yes.
with a scripture verse. So maybe you can share that, and then that can be a fodder for what we're going to talk about.
Okay. Well,
Tell us about this this
my special water bottle. Okay.
water bottle. There you
Well,
go.
interestingly, when Pastor Dave introduced Venture Church Network and what Venture stands for, advancing in the face of risk and danger, that's exactly what Pastor Dave did 2 Sundays ago.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
That was venturesome.
You ventured into some challenging texts in 1 Timothy chapter 2 about the roles of men and women in ministry. And you opened with a statement that you doubted that you would see a certain verse on mugs and t-shirts. So I had to challenge you. And I put this verse on my water bottle. So here it is. I don't know if you can see it or
I
zoom
stand
in.
corrected.
But if you can't
Spoke
read
too
it,
soon.
on my water bottle is the verse from 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 12 that says, "I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet." So on that note, maybe I'm supposed to be quiet.
Well, we'll
Please
definitely
don't be quiet.
We'll definitely get to that. And since we've been off for a few weeks, we've missed I think 2 sermons. And then we obviously had one this past Sunday. But what's cool is they're actually part of a segment, a narrative arc that happens in 1 Timothy 2 and 3. So starting in 1 Timothy chapter 2, 1-7, that block is really about prayer. I called it the foundation of the church. And that had some debated verses in there, primarily related to the Calvinism, Arminianism debate about do all people get saved? So that was that, and then the middle section was the 1 Timothy 8-15, which is about the role of men and women in public worship. And then this past Sunday, we talked about elders and deacons and what godly church leadership looks like. So I think we'll probably want to spend most of our time on Dave's sermon, but maybe we can kind of go in order and quickly talk about the opening message, the 2:1-7, which was on Mother's Day. So basically, I highlighted that as far as it. I threaded the prayer theme through there because it was Mother's Day, and we talked a little bit about why we should pray and what the roles of that are in Timothy, what prayer is, why we don't pray. And so we talked about how Paul said we have to know the scope of our prayers, the mission of our prayers, and the fuel of our prayers. And I had some stories about Augustine's mom and about Christopher Yuan's mom. And how prayer really should be the foundation of the church. But there was a couple of verses in there where specifically I'm thinking about Paul tells people to pray for those that are in high positions. So we talked about how we should pray for all our politicians, not just the ones we disagreed with, because the early church prayed for Nero, who was trying to kill them. And then we got into verses 3 and 4, where it says that God, particularly verse 4, God desires all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So does that mean all people are saved? And then later on, he gives another restriction about this whole idea of salvation. Verse 6 says, Jesus gave himself as a ransom for all, which is a testimony at the proper time. And then, of course, we finished off by challenging how we can pray for people and have wider hearts. So do you guys have any thoughts or questions about that sermon? We don't need to spend a ton of time on it, but I figured we'd bring it up since we missed it.
Was that the one that was the foundation of the church, or was that...
I called it the foundation of the church.
I thought
prayer.
that was the title of your sermon from the chapter 1.
Oh, sorry. It was a healthy church. A healthy church is a praying church. Sorry, the foundation was the gospel
The
itself.
gospel is the foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
I thought you changed foundations on me in mid.
No, sorry. Yeah,
construction
thank you for
project.
correcting that. No, a healthy church is a praying church. That was this message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you think Paul urges prayer for those in authority?
I think he urges prayer because it would have been against their natural inclination to do so. And yet, in other passages of Scripture, we learn that people who are in leadership positions and government officials, Romans 13, he calls them deacons. He's the servant, the civil servant, and there's nobody who's in place that God is not allowed to be in place. So praying for them would be us thinking about how we can influence society through crying out to God in our prayers.
I think there were a couple of very meaningful and convicting takeaways were, first, you gave some wonderful examples of mothers who are really but persisting in prayer.
Yes.
And it's very easy to get discouraged if you're not seeing results over a short period of time. I know several parents, women in particular, who are praying for their children who are adults and maybe going in a wrong direction and are feeling very discouraged. So the examples that you shared, I thought were just perfectly encouraging to persist in prayer. Especially Mrs. Angela Yuan.
Yes, who we got to meet last year. Yeah,
we met her last year. I forget how long she prayed, but probably 10 years or so.
At least
10 years.
Yeah.
And then the second convicting element was praying for the leaders and politicians that you don't necessarily agree with or support.
Yes.
If you just look on social media, it's so much easier to complain rather than pray for them.
Yes,
I
yes.
thought that was an excellent application.
How do you guys think regular intercession for others shapes our attitude toward them?
I heard somebody say one time that when you pray for somebody, your hearts get knit together. So when you're actively praying for somebody, I think it draws your mind and your heart to them on a regular basis in a way that it wouldn't. It humanizes them to a great degree. If I'm just criticizing them, I can very much put them over there, and I'm just lobbing grenades at them from my perch of righteousness. But whether that person's a Christian or not, if they're doing things that we would very much disagree with, they are still a fallen human being. Then they need Jesus.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me personally, when I'm praying for someone that I strongly disagree with, I think that the Holy Spirit really convicts me to move from criticism to compassion. And I begin to see them as someone who is in need of God's transforming work in their heart. And I begin to empathize, well, what is driving them to be maybe controversial or in conflict? So that's a great question.
Yeah, I think contextually too, one of the reasons Paul is calling the church to pray here is for the salvation of folks. So why should we pray? We should pray for all people because God desires all people would come to a knowledge of the truth, even if all don't. So you're almost joining God in the mission of seeing people come to know Him.
Right. Doesn't it really just remind us to have a biblical worldview, remembering that all are affected by the fall and are in need of grace? So.
Yeah, good.
What does it mean that God desires all people to be saved? Bob?
Yeah, good. So I did address it in the message. Obviously, there's difference of opinions on this, depending on whether you take more of a Calvinistic lens versus an Arminian lens. Can we resist God's effectual call on us? But I think at least two things, this is what I mentioned about verse 4, at least two things can be mentioned there. First, I would say that there can be a difference between God's desire and His fixed will. So the word translated as desires seems to indicate a difference, if you actually look at the Greek word, between God's desire and what He actually wills. So I could wish something to happen, but that doesn't mean it will happen. And I think that's what Paul's getting at here. But then secondly, in the Bible, that word all, and this is where it often trips people up, all doesn't always mean every individual. In this case, and this was agreed upon by at least Augustine and Calvin, that Paul is speaking here about people groups and not necessarily individuals. So he is desiring to see people come to faith from all the nations, even if not every single individual indeed is saved. And I will quote from John Stott, who wrote this: "No nation of the earth and no rank of society is excluded from salvation, since God wills to offer the gospel to all without exception." And he says Paul is speaking rather of classes of people and not of individuals in this particular verse.
So rather than all without exception, it's all without distinction.
Yes.
All kinds of people, even kings.
Good. There you go. Even that's exactly true.
So regarding the whole Reformed versus Calvinistic thing, is it okay to say that there's something about God's desire, that his will, that it would be theologically correct to say it's not his desire that any should perish,
right?
Even though perhaps it's not part of his foreknowledge and divine sovereign plan, that would not be something that God is actively what's the right word here? That
Like he takes no delight in.
doesn't take delight in.
Yeah.
Right.
There's this view of sort of like this distorted view, like a double predestination view.
Right.
That God equally wills some to go to heaven, and then he equally reprobates others to be damned. So it's fair to say that that's not his desire. He takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, right?
Yeah, that's true. And that's to go along with the Augustine theme. That was very much his position, which was more of a single, if you can call it a single predestination, that God will save some, but those that aren't saved are ultimately getting what they desire in their heart, and they don't desire God. The God, in his mercy, chooses to save some, but not all. Even if he desires all people to be saved, there are some that will still reject him. But obviously, a tension here, which is why it's been debated for literally thousands of years.
Very interesting theological discussion.
Yep. Okay. Good. Well, anything else about this, or can we move on to the probably more controversial section in 8 to 15?
Dun, dun,
Dun,
dun.
dun.
All right. So Pastor Dave mentioned that this section was on his calendar for many, many months, and he was preparing feverishly for this message, and it was obviously well researched, well crafted. Thanks for handling that topic. It's good that we finally had some teaching on that. I know some folks out there who have been watching the podcast have been asking questions, and we've been delaying. And this was the moment for us to talk about this. So why don't you give us an overview of 1 Timothy 2, 8 to 15, and then we'll talk about all the intricacies therein.
There are gender roles when it comes to ministry, and Paul is giving different commands to men and women in those sections. He is encouraging men to not power up and be characterized by anger and quarreling, and instead to surrender to God and draw from his strength. And then for women, he also gives an instruction there that they're not to adorn themselves with outwardly attractive attire, but rather that they should focus on holiness as their primary means of pursuing beauty. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with physical beauty, that's fine, but let the primary issue be your good works. And then he goes on to say the controversial verse that's on the water bottle here, that in terms of the teaching role, in terms of the leadership role, that God is going to excuse women from certain leadership capacities, and he's going to hold men responsible or accountable for certain leadership roles in the church. And he outlines those and says the reason for this is not because of a cultural reason, but because of how things were at the very beginning foundationally in Genesis, that Adam was created first, and that there was a transgression by the woman, and the desire in the church is to honor God's original creation and his design. So that was 4 or 5 verses of controversial data there. And it's hard for us to talk about that because there's a lot of other side issues and things that come up in our minds, like, well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And sometimes I think before we even look at the text and, maybe just take it at face value, we've got a bunch of mental clutter that we have to sort of work through in the beginning. So that's my setup. I have some more to say about that, but why don't you guys share a little bit about why this issue is a struggle and how you guys are relating to this?
Yeah, well,
dynamic?
I think the reason it's a struggle, and you can chime in here, Amy, is we live in a very egalitarian society, right? So people look at the church and say, you're taking a position that's very different than the wider culture. You don't see women excluded from, a lot of other roles. A woman could take on any role. They could be president. They could be, although they have not been yet, but they certainly could be in our day and age. Why would the church restrict any of their roles to women? I did have one question. You want to chime in though?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. But my question was, so you obviously you took and we take the narrow complementarian position. Could you articulate how an egalitarian would read these verses differently? Mm-hmm. How would you read these verses and say, well, the
sure,
all the roles should be open to women?
Sure. In case those categories are unfamiliar, is it okay if we just explain the categories first?
Yeah.
So there's a chart.
You got your chart that we should put up here?
Chart citing.
Love the chart.
And there's a spectrum here,
enlightening.
and I think it's helpful to know where things land on the spectrum, although that yellow box is super bright and maybe hard to look at. So on the left side is the patriarchy.
Not quite as bright as my shirt today, though.
Yeah, male-dominated society. We see patriarchal societies in the past. We even see some of them today. In certain cultures. And then on the other side is feminism, which was largely a reaction to the patriarchy. That is originally there was 4 different waves of feminism. Originally it was about women's suffrage and women having a greater stake in society, but it came to mean so much more over the years. And then sort of these 3 positions are in the middle. So egalitarianism is the view that men and women are, you see the word egal, that's kind of the word equal embedded in that term, that men and women have equal access to all roles in the home, in the church, and in society, and that there would be no restrictions whatsoever on any woman for pursuing any office anywhere. So that's egalitarian. And then there's 2 different complementarian positions. Narrow is the position that says men and women are different, but the roles that are different are excluded to the realm of the home and the church. Broad complementarianism says actually there's something inherent about this that stretches to all spheres of society, including the workplace, including politics, including the wider culture, so that generally speaking, men are called to lead in all of those spheres. That's a broad complementarian position. So those are the categories. Do I need to clarify anything there before I answer Bob's question about that? Or?
No, I think that's a helpful clarification.
Okay. All right. So Tim, you could take it down. So Bob's question, how does an egalitarian read this text? And I try to be, in my study of this topic, as fair as possible. I really went in, and this started last summer, actually, on the lawnmower, listening to videos.
Wow.
I was like, okay, tell me, convince me. You know that meme with the guy on the sign, like, tell me I'm wrong, right? So I really wanted to know, what is the best possible argument? Because I'm reading these texts like this one, and I'm like, how do you do this? So I actually think it would be a lot easier to become an egalitarian. It would be a lot less problematic. It would just kind of go right in with where we are as a society, and I wouldn't have to have such a controversial view. So I want it to be open, because these are not slouches who hold this view. We're talking about godly scholars, Craig Keener, even Doug Groteis, Linda Belleville. These are people that both you and I quote and respect, and they've done their homework, and they have earned doctorates. So I wanted to know, what's the argument for egalitarianism? And so there's a lot of different arguments. It's not one argument, but one of the things they would say is the inequality actually crept into humanity after the fall. All of the inequities were really part of Genesis chapter 3, and that power struggle that you see there. Her desire will be for her husband. He will rule. That power differentiation was a post-fall reality, and as Christians, because Jesus has reversed the curse, generally we want to go back to the way it was at the beginning, that it was very good. Complementarianisms, I think, rightly say, actually, there seems to be an order before the fall, and there seems to be some leadership positions that were given even to Adam in the garden, and then Paul is appealing to the fact that Adam was
appealing to
created
creation
first. So I found that argument to be unpersuasive. Another argument that egalitarians use is that the famous trump card in Galatians, and it's just this one verse that says, there is neither male nor female, nor slave nor free, nor Jew nor Gentile. We no longer have those distinctions in Galatians. And that as much as I read, and I did read a lot, that was the ace of spades. That was the trump card. That came out in almost every single book, article, podcast, argument. Hey, what about Galatians 3? There's no male nor female. In my mind, I feel that text is overused and distorted in nature. It does not really have anything to do with roles or leadership or elders or pastors or
it has to do with
teaching.
salvation.
It has to do with inheritance and as being part of the covenant and how Christ grafts us in. This is what Galatians is teaching. And we don't have the kind of distinctions that we used to have because we're all one in Christ Jesus. So yeah, it's about salvation more so than it's about these different roles. But Galatians 3 is a major egalitarian text. It is something that complementarians have to wrestle with and overcome.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty big argument. And, there are reputable scholars that believe that. They also point to other key women in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, that seem to take on huge leadership positions and say, hey, how do you explain this if you are a complementarian? These women are clearly powerful women. And they are right. There were some really powerful women in the early church, not only in the New Testament, but Amy, you had sent me a podcast from TGC Women's Conference.
Yes.
And the talk that Amy sent me had just all of the women in the second century church. And these were rock stars. Women were stepping up in huge ways in the early church. That adds to the argument that, hey, these are powerful women that were clearly part of the leadership of the church. How can you say that there's any sort of role distinction? Those are some of the arguments, Bob. There's a lot more there, but that gives you some answers to the question, how people can go there. So, I'm doing too much talking here, so you guys chime in here.
Well,
you jump in here.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can go back and forth.
I mean, I definitely appreciated your approach to the message and the context, especially historically. You shared how many other cultures and even religions are truly oppressive toward women, and Christianity elevates and values women. So I definitely appreciated that, because I think that is a misunderstanding in today's culture of recognizing the distinction of roles, because it's easy for the culture to assume that there's different values placed on women because of the differences. But I just thought you did a masterful job of explaining that men and women are equal in value, but are distinctly different. I mean, biologically and in the roles between men and women in the church and in the family in particular. I had not been familiar with the distinctions of narrow and broad complementarian before this message, so I really appreciated that.
Those are helpful categories. Actually, the chart is more complicated. That is a rather simple version. There's other spots along the spectrum, but those are some big buckets to think about. But I like what you're saying, and that's one of the reasons we can't think about this biblically, because of the evils of patriarchy, which are true, and we should speak out against them. And there has been oppression of women, and it has been also done sometimes in the name of the Bible, which is especially egregious. And I think that we need to take some ownership there, because complementarianism can go really wrong and really toxic. And it can be abused, but I don't think that we want to say that those texts were properly used. They were abused in order to support that kind of thing. But that's one of the reasons why we can't think about this, because we think immediately to the distortion of the hierarchy, rather than thinking about, oh, that's sin that has actually corrupted the hierarchy. And so we attack the hierarchy rather than attack the sin itself that's doing the corrupting. And I think that's part of the problem. So,
And I think secular culture, if they're not basing any anchor or weight on the scriptures, they're going to just simply react to what's happening. So the oppression of women in the patriarchal society caused an uprising, right? Because women had been mistreated. But I think that the pendulum easily swings too far in the other direction to feminism. That's why we need to really anchor ourselves in the truth of Scripture to guide our life and think biblically about these roles.
Good. Well, before we get to some of the applicational things, can we just talk a little bit about, I think you're bringing up a really great point about how not just secular society, but even a lot of Christians are influenced by the cultural narratives, the cultural stories, what's going on in the waters that are out there. And they don't, I think a lot of people don't actually wrestle with the text because it becomes a hermeneutical issue. So one of the things you didn't bring up that I often hear cited is something called the trajectory hermeneutic. That this was, and maybe you started to get at that with it post the fall, where, these were things that were true in Paul's context, but, as we kept going further and further away from that, it doesn't necessarily mean they're prescriptive for today. So what are the hermeneutical by hermeneutics I mean your method of interpretation that makes this binding for us today when it comes to 1 Timothy 2, and then maybe we can talk about some of the other relevant passages.
It's somewhat simplistic to say, hey, the Bible says it, that settles it, because we do actually all bring our interpretive lenses to the Bible. For example, there's another controversial passage in 1 Corinthians about women covering their heads. Oftentimes, in contemporary, narrow complementarian context, we don't see women following that command, and we don't have a problem with it. So why is it that we see certain prescriptive exhortations, imperatives in the New Testament, and then we choose to say those are cultural, we no longer have to follow those, but then we see other commands in the New Testament and say, no, those are absolutely universal, we have to follow them. So the trajectory hermeneutic says the Bible's headed somewhere, and it's obviously going to be pursuing liberation for all peoples, and there's an argument to be made, and this is another great egalitarian argument. It's a solid one, because in the same epistles we read about slavery in the same epistles, and we wonder, is this what God has for us? He wants us to maintain this system of oppression, and the Christians in the 19th century said no, that's not where we want to head. The Bible is setting God's people free, and we want to fight for human dignity in that way, and they made a decision about certain New Testament imperatives and said, no, the trajectory was that women would be, that slaves would be set free, and that similarly, they would say the trajectory is that women would be at some point seen as completely in the same roles as men. I don't want to say equal with men, because they are equal with men. That's not in dispute, and it would be a distortion of the complementarian position to say that they're not. So the trajectory hermeneutic is one that you have to wrestle with, and it's a pretty strong argument. But the complementarian reaction to that is they say, well, you're taking this trajectory, and it seems to them like a slippery slope, because what else are you going to put on that trajectory? Are you also going to say the Bible had a narrow, restrictive view of marriage, and the trajectory is that more and more types of unions can be accepted because, after all, love is love, and the trajectory of the Bible is ultimately headed towards love, so we should be affirming and accepting of all of these other adaptations of marriage.
And most of the churches that have actually appealed to that have taken that to its logical conclusion. So they are indeed affirming anything. So gay marriage and full equality there and all that.
Okay. So, yeah. Do you want to comment on that? Okay. So this is what we call a tier 2 issue. So a tier 1 issue is a gospel issue. You have to believe this to be a Christian. The gospel, the Trinity, the Bible is a revelation from God. These are tier 1 issues. We don't compromise on them. We fight. Women in ministry is a tier 2 issue. What that means is we have brothers and sisters in Christ that we love and walk arm in arm with and shoulder to shoulder with, and they disagree. And it's okay to disagree on tier 2 issues. I have great respect for many, many complementarians and many, many egalitarians as well as complementarians. I mean, N.T. Wright is a famous egalitarian. I read him all the time. So I disagree with him, but I think we have to say this is a tier 2 issue. Now, here's the trick thing. This tier 2 issue for some people seems so tied to a tier 1 issue because it's like, you're saying this is tier 2, but it's tied to this. Do you take 1 Timothy 2 seriously or not? And it seems to some that you're not taking the Bible seriously. And so, the famous saying is, I like Jesus, but I don't really like Paul.
Right.
People have an affinity for the red letters. They like the Jesus that they read about in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But then this guy Paul comes along, and he's oppressive, and he's got these ideas that are in contradiction to their understanding. And I think that's a flawed way of thinking. Jesus told his disciples as he sent them out, whoever listens to you is going to listen to me. and he equivocates those whom he's sending with actually accepting himself. And so Paul is certainly one that he has sent out, and so he's been given the authority of Christ, and he teaches in Jesus' name. And so we understand that the Bible does have specific letters that are actually the words of Jesus, but the whole Bible is actually also the words of Jesus. So this is the revelation of the one triune God of Scripture. So we don't want to divide it unnecessarily in that way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues involved. One of them is hermeneutical,
Yeah.
that you talked about. The other one is anthropological, which I think is the question of our day. You know, many
Right.
generations have had to wrestle with certain questions.
What you mean by that is, are men and women the same, or are there differences?
Physiologically.
All of that, and
Right.
let's back it up a step even farther and say, what is a man? What is a woman?
What is a woman?
That is a
That's a great question.
Question
I think I've
that-
heard that asked in the news before.
that's a question that I think is the question of our day. You know, certain generations have had to wrestle with certain theological issues. You know, one generation had Nicaea 1,700 years ago this year, by the way. One generation had to deal with Christology. One generation had to deal with, like, the inerrancy of the Scriptures. This is our issue. What is a man? What is a woman? How do
Yeah.
we define that according to the Bible? And those are questions that I think are questions behind the question, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's something that we need to be wrestling with and teaching about, because the culture is giving us a different message.
Good.
So.
Well, I do want to
Yeah.
just maybe challenge our viewers today who may not have heard the sermon, or maybe they did and are wrestling with it. I encourage you to continue to wrestle with it and not just avoid it or take a position that is just argumentative for the sake of argument. But I appreciate that you both actually don't shy away from these difficult passages, and you seek to be balanced and recognize the differing viewpoint. I agree that this is a tier 2 issue. I've worked in an environment, Christian organizations, where there are people on multiple sides of the spectrum who I respect, but would really invite people to again, just dig deep into what the Scripture says and recognize that there are a lot of emotions, and we want to kind of level set the emotions and just really be open to what God is saying in the original text.
Yeah, and one of the reasons it's certainly emotional is that, yes, it's a tier 2 issue, but it's a very practical tier 2 issue, because one of the things that Paul was doing in this section is outlining how should you order the church, how should the church operate, and you have to make a decision on which position you're going to take.
And that's why it's okay to sometimes have different churches that are have tier 2 differences, because they're practical in nature. Are we going to have women pastors or not? Are we going to baptize by immersion or not?
Right.
So you have to make certain decisions. Let me just say one more thing before we go on to the next passage. Okay, so Satan is an extremist, and I think he attacks, on the one hand, both gender equality and gender difference on the other hand. And here's what I mean by that. Satanic equality is the kind of equality that levels all the hierarchies, because the sense of self that comes from Satan is only rooted in the self. And so it cannot tolerate any externally imposed limitation. So it smothers the difference. It levels them out. It flattens them out, right? God-given equality is different than that. It is untroubled by distinctions that are distinctions such as the distinctions between male and female, because the equality and the value and the worth that is God-given equality is the gift of his image that's bestowed upon us. And so we have to ask and answer the question, God, who do you say that I am? What is the value that you are giving me? What would you have me to do? And so I think at the bottom of this debate is defining manhood and womanhood is something that we have to wrestle with, but that definition has not been left up to us. We are bestowed these differences by a holy God, and he has a good plan for us. And when it works, and many times it doesn't work, when it works, it is a beautiful design that's a picture of creation and also a beautiful picture of redemption, Christ and the church, and so forth. So
Good. So can I ask a kind of a transitional question here? If we go on to the next passage about elders and deacons is where it kind of gets practical. You asked a good question in your message of in chapter 2, verse 12, what is Paul restricting? And I'll just throw in here one of the things that you didn't mention because it's probably too technical, but I will mention here the Greek construction of the I do not permit a woman to teach and have authority over a man is a Greek construction called a hiatus, which literally means 1 through 2. And it's where it's a figure of speech where two words are connected by this conjunction and they express a single notion. So you can't teach and have authority, which I think gets at what he's restricting here. And maybe you can say a little bit about what you said in your message.
some people say it's a hiatus.
Yeah.
Some people don't. So they separate the words and say, no, teaching is something different, having authority is something different. Some people hold them together. So there's even different views on how to understand that. But I think probably the most natural way to take it is there's this combination that Paul is restricting, and it bleeds right over into the next chapter, chapter 3.
Right,
well,
right.
Okay, who does have the authority to teach? And then he
right.
brings out this qualifications for elders
Right,
there,
right.
which
Okay.
brings us to where you need us to go.
Yeah, of course. So chapter 3 is where we move naturally into this idea of elders and deacons, the office of the overseer, the office of the deacon, and then finishes off with this beautiful confession about Jesus and how he is the one who is worthy of all our worship. But yeah, chapter 3, we talked to Paul moved into one of his trademark lists. He talked about the office of the overseer and gave all these moral qualifications and then a few ministry qualifications and home qualifications. What I challenged people to see was that Paul spends most of his time on the moral qualities of the elder as well as the deacon in chapter 3 for those qualifications. Now, the other thing to mention about that is that all the qualifications that are mentioned for elders and deacons are elsewhere in the New Testament spoken of and applied to Christians writ large. But here he's making a big deal about if you're going to be in a leadership position in the church, you really need to have these qualities at the forefront of your life.
Why does Paul do that? I mean, somebody could have skills, man. They could be an excellent orator. They could be a rhetoric. What is the word there I'm looking for? I don't know. Someone with good rhetoric.
Rhetorician.
They could, spin an argument, man. So how come that's not good enough? Why does Paul do it that way?
Yeah, specifically for the elders, I think in other places he talks about how those who teach will be judged with a higher account, and it is the elder who is noted as being the one who is able to teach. But also the big idea of the message was that character must come before competence, that if you don't have character, your competence really doesn't matter that much because you're going to be losing your influence if your character does not match the skills that you bring to the table.
So it doesn't really matter what you say. If people look at your life and you're not really living.
Well, I think about all the folks over the last few years that have fallen, and they said a lot of really truthful things, but now they're tainted by their moral life not being in order. So it's a big deal. You don't want to be seen as a hypocrite in that respect.
Well, you opened up with an interesting illustration of two leaders.
Oh, yes.
One with a lot of skill, but not the character. Do you want to share that again with our audience?
Yeah, sure. So it was a case study from Skye Jitani in his book Immeasurable. And I did switch a little bit because he used the illustration of Hitler and Bonhoeffer. So he kind of gives this depiction of Hitler as being somebody who changed the world, but then reveals that it was Hitler later on. Somebody obviously who had a lot of competency as a leader, was able to motivate people, but obviously had a lot of character flaws. And then he contrasted that with Bonhoeffer, who had this character, good character, but was not as well known. I inserted from some good recommendations the guy Desmond Doss, who was the center of the movie Hacksaw Ridge, where he was a medic in the U.S. Army in World War II who was not as well known, but gave his life to go and save 75 people without any in the field of battle without any weapons. So which leader would you rather follow? And often we're drawn to the person who's seen as charismatic, gifted, even if we don't see those character flaws at the beginning. And so the point was that character really should be the first thing we assess before we get enamored by their competence.
I have seen old video footage of Hitler giving speeches and stuff, and it is fiery, man. That guy can get riled up. And I don't speak German, but whatever he's saying, I'm like, man, I'm getting excited. Whatever this guy's talking about, he knows how to.
Well, and he knew how
yes.
to. Often, gifted leaders know how to read the zeitgeist of the moment. And think about, you're in Germany after World War I. Your country's decimated, and he's the one who's offering hope. So you can fault people, but you can see probably why they followed him at that time.
Zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Spirit
of the age. That's right. Spirit of the age. Yeah.
All right.
So what other questions about elders and deacons? So maybe let me mention in relation with your passage. So I took the position, we take the position that the office of elder is restricted to men. But the office of deacon is open to men and women, and that's partly based on a reading of 1 Timothy 3:11, where in the ESV it says that seems to make an interpretive decision that it's the deacons' wives, rather. Verse 11, their wives likewise must be dignified, not slanderers, sober-minded, faithful in all things. So he's listing off these character qualities. The thing here is that in the Greek, the word for wives is the word gunekos, and it can be translated wives or women. You have to basically let the context dictate that, and the ESV is making a decision here to say their wives, applying it to deacons, but I would say the more natural reading is that it's the women likewise, indicating that it's more of a parallel office. So you have the deacons, chapter 3, verse 8, deacons likewise must be dignified. Verse 11, the women likewise must be dignified. So it seems like he's creating these two parallel offices, as well as in other places you see somebody like Phoebe being noted as a deacon or deaconess in Romans 16:1, among other things. And also you have the absence of the qualifications for elders' wives. So it seems weird that he's giving qualifications for deacons' wives but not elders' wives. Why wouldn't he do it for both? So those are some of the arguments for that. Other people have different opinions on that, but that's the position I took, and that's the take, and that's what we take as a church. So yeah.
If you want to read about the debate, this is one of the resources I digested for my sermon. It's a 9-marks journal called Complementarianism, An Age of Reckoning. And it's full of articles. One of them is a debate about men deacons and women deacons. And they have two different opposing views here. So I think it's Schreiner who does, yes, women can be deacons, and I think it's Alex Struck who does, no, women who cannot be deacons. I disagree with Struck, but he gives his case in this particular periodical. You can go to Amazon and get this. It's an excellent publication. I love it. I wish I had more time to read them all, but this one was one that I was able to fully read everything. It's a good read.
Yeah.
But you reminded me of another egalitarian argument. So I didn't mention this one, but as you said, the term woman and wife are the same in Greek, gune,
right,
as are the term for men and husband, aner. So another way to take 1 Timothy 2 is, instead of saying, I do not permit a woman to teach a man, he could very well, using the same Greek words, be actually saying, I do not permit a wife to teach a husband. And so that's a different egalitarian argument.
Right.
And it's actually supported by the fact that the very next verse, he is actually appealing to a husband and wife dynamic with Adam and Eve. So there's an egalitarian way to read that text as well, because of the lack of clarity there with regards to the Greek words.
But even in that context, the wife would still need to submit to the husband.
The husband.
Right?
But it would
I think
allow
you have all
women,
the household codes and
Yeah.
Paul's letters that appeal to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be in the home, but it
Right.
would, in the church context, it would
Okay.
not be restricted.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it was more of, let's just keep this hierarchical structure in the home. That's that. I guess it's not fully egalitarian. So
Okay.
I shouldn't have said it's a.
So you mean, is there a category where the roles are limited just to the family and not the church?
Exactly.
I see.
Yes,
I see.
and that would be an argument in favor of that view.
I see.
So
Yeah.
the churches has
But-
more open.
The reason I was starting to talk about the 1 Timothy 2:12 and the Greek construction is that I personally take it, and I don't remember if you said it in the sermon or not, that it's I do not permit to teach and have authority over the elders, which come up then in chapter 3. So that gets into some of the practical things about, like, can a woman help teach a Sunday school class? Who is the one that has the ultimate spiritual authority in the church? It's the elders.
Yeah, I mean, you have to translate it man, but it, I think, has to be referring to whoever that man is that has the authoritative teaching role in the church. And it's hard to know exactly what that means, but I think it has to do with authoritative doctrine, things like creeds, policies, those types of confessions, that God is going to hold the men responsible for those kinds of teaching roles. Yeah. Right.
So what I'm getting at is practically speaking, in our church, it's really the elders are the authority of doctrine and policy and all of that, and that we have some leeway underneath about what women can do and even teach.
Right.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of leeway.
Yeah.
Our church only restricts the office of elder and pastor to men. There are no other restrictions. So women can teach in a very free way in all different contexts. And so and we want to give them those platforms because we believe they have something to say, and we want to listen, and we believe we can learn. And so I think it's, if you actually read our Women in Ministry position paper, I think it's very liberating towards gifted women who know how to, use their wonderful skills and talents for the glory of God in all kinds of wonderful leadership roles. So I think if you read the document, actually read it and study it, you'd go, I can pretty much use all the gifts that God has given me here. And so we hope that feels that way to the women, even if it takes some getting used to hearing the language. So
yeah. Great. All right, good. Other questions about elders and deacons? Other thoughts?
Is the next sermon going to distinguish the ruling and teaching elders, or do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. I mean, the next one's going to get into chapter 4, but what I mentioned is often, maybe more so in a Presbyterian context, they do distinguish on what they call the session, which is the elders, between the teaching and the ruling elders. And the teaching elders are usually the teaching pastor, or those that are doing the primary teaching from the pulpit. And then you have all of them rule, but there are other ruling elders that are overseeing and governing the church, but don't have the primary teaching role within the church. Right. Which, your question, but when we get to chapter 5 or 17, that's where it does talk about that. Yeah, but that's not the very next sermon.
Okay. Got it.
Worthy of double honor, those who do leadership and teaching roles well. There seems to be a remuneration given to the teaching elder at those churches.
Right. So that's why I was saying. So that would be Dave and I, and then you have the other council of elders that are together.
Right.
But we have to get through chapter 4 before we get there.
Okay. Lot to look forward to.
Chapter 4 is about the pastor.
Yeah.
I think we went elders, deacons, and I think we're going pastor this week.
Yeah.
So,
questions about the words for elder. So I talked about the 3 terms that are often used interchangeably. The episkopos, which is the overseer, and that's the word that's used in chapter 3 here. Other places we have presbyteros, which is often translated elder, and then poimen, which is usually translated as shepherd or pastor.
Okay.
But those words are often used interchangeably, and maybe describing different functions about the actual elder. So the elder may have actually referred to the age or commensurate Christian experience. They were somebody who was basically saying somebody who was experienced in the Christian life. What they did was they oversaw the church, and they shepherded the people of God. This is the role of the elder and what they do. Okay. Yeah, but it was interesting to me though. Episkopos was the Greek word, and presbyteros, or maybe that was the Jewish word, and presbyteros was the Greek word. So they were 2 different contexts using a different word, but talking about the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to have a chart in the future
Episkopos, presbyteros, Baptist.
Would you add anything to that, or?
I would just say, with all due respect to our friends who are Episcopalian or Presbyterian, I kind of like the model that we have for a couple reasons, and this is one of those tier 2 things. Okay, we're all friends. But when you have an Episcopalian structure, you tend to locate a lot of power up high in those who have those positions, and they're able to exercise that authority.
Because they have bishops over an area of churches.
Yes. Yeah. So they can make certain carte blanche decisions with the authority that's been delegated to them with some degree of ease. Sometimes that's good. I mean, efficiency is wonderful. Dictatorships are wonderfully efficient governments. However, if you get the wrong person in charge, you can actually create a lot of problematic changes in a short amount of time. And sometimes churches that have the hierarchical structures like that have made doctrinal changes very easily, very speedily, and whole denominations have been affected by a very small amount of people. So in the model that we have, we actually locate the authority of the of our church in the congregation. So in order to make, so say for example here at Millington, if you wanted to change the Articles of Faith, like Bob and I and the elders can't just do that. We have to get, is it 2/3, I think, majority of the congregation to vote on a change of the Constitution?
Now,
Maybe 75%. It's high. So we have to get a whole bunch of people to agree to a doctrinal change, which is why sometimes you see mainline denominations have left certain tier 1 doctrinal distinctions and never gone back. But if you want to preserve the gospel and keep the gospel, put the authority in the congregation and make your people vote. And then you would have a very difficult time letting go of some of the like, key tenets of the faith. So there's some benefits to our model that I think are worth communicating.
Yeah.
So
the Presbyterians don't have bishops, but they have a presbytery who can make sweeping decisions over multiple churches. And I did find this out, that if you are somebody who has an issue with a pastor, like in another part of your presbytery, you can go and write and bring charges against them, even if you're not in their church.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that wouldn't be something that happens within Baptist circles.
right,
Yeah.
No.
which gets confusing, and there's some wonderful aspects to that, because there's a partnership there. There's a word for it, the cooperation or something like that.
Co-belligerent?
There's something. Anyway, so it's good to have help outside when there's a problem in the church. It's also unclear sometimes who's responsible to fix this problem with this pastor. Does it fall with the local church or the presbytery? And sometimes people are disgruntled or disappointed with the way in which the presbytery is handling the local problems. And so sometimes it's like, where does the buck stop in that model? And it can be disappointing. Each model has like pros and cons.
So then our relationship with Venture is more of just an association or affiliation.
Friendly
good
cooperation.
Good question. Yeah. But they don't have authority over our church.
Right.
Which is often, I guess the downside of that is sometimes it's hard to get people to actually engage. We're trying to get more churches engaged within the network.
Right.
But no, we can't even have our regional director can't come in and tell us what to do.
Right.
Although they can kick us out if they don't feel like we're friendly cooperating with
to
them.
be in friendly cooperation, you do have to hold to the Articles of Faith. And we primarily got together just to have a unity around supporting missionaries and to have an ability to work together, because it's hard for one church to send one missionary. So it's a better model is to have multiple churches supporting one missionary, because if one church actually declines or even closes, boy, that missionary in China is in trouble, right? So it's better for them not to put all their eggs in one basket and have their support spread around. So Baptist churches exist in friendly cooperation in order to, maybe make that process.
Same thing with the Southern Baptist Convention.
Got it.
But you need to be in friendly cooperation, which has sort of been their big debate recently about egalitarianism.
Oh,
it was a
that's
major.
right.
Was it 2 years ago? They actually.
I think it's still going on.
Sent
but
away.
It definitely was a big. Yeah.
They actually, the SBC let go of, I think, the largest church in their denomination, Rick Warren's church, Saddleback Church, because of egalitarianism. And they voted to remove them from friendly cooperation 2 years ago. So there was this battle between Al Mohler and Rick Warren. It was all the rage in the news and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's an amendment called the Law Amendment they're still trying to get passed. Yeah. I think it's going to come up again in the meeting in a couple weeks, their big convention. Yeah. So Southern Baptist politics, but we're not Southern Baptist, just so you know.
No, we're not. Conservative Baptist.
All right. Okay, so that's the messages. Can we move on to the book? Or you actually gave your book recommendation.
I did. 9 Marks Journal, Complementarianism.
Oh, that's your book
A
recommendation.
Moment of Reckoning.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
there
kind
you
of a
go.
book. I mean, it's like, it's 132 pages. It's a book.
It is.
Just
It
a
is
weird
it is a
shape.
book. There you go.
Moment of Reckoning.
All right. Well, I'll just mention my what I'll recommend here is a book by Dan Allender called "Leading with a Limp," since we've been speaking about leadership, and this really talks quite a bit about how you need to embrace your weakness and not lead without it. So I'll just give you the snippet here. Pick up most leadership books and you'll find strategies for leveraging your power and minimizing your area of weakness. But rather than work against your weakness, why not draw from a deeper well of strength? God favors leaders who make the most of the power that comes from brokenness. This is a very famous book, and I think it's one I've read several times. Just gives a lot of really good biblical illustrations, but also helpful pointers on how you can be a more authentic leader. And since we're talking about being a servant leader, this is a great book to learn about how to do that. So, Leading with a Limp, right there, is my recommendation for this week.
Very good. Amy,
I guess we're
you
throwing
have
in
a
the
book
middle.
recommendation? Or
Do I have a book recommendation?
you don't have to have one. It's okay.
Today I do not.
Okay, that's
So
fine.
I'll be supporting you guys.
All right. Well, you let us know.
Well, can I recommend your book?
You're welcome to do
Can
that.
if you want to.
Wait, we have a book?
You have a book.
Yeah. I got to finish up that other book.
Book about the life
Amy's
of David.
in charge of our PR campaign.
Right. I know. If you haven't read it, do we have a copy here that we can spotlight?
Somewhere? No, I don't see it. Tim can
Sold out.
insert a picture right now.
But no, yeah, I've been benefiting a lot about the your exposition on the books of Samuel and comparing the lives of King Saul and King David and even the prophet Samuel. So yeah, I just see so many practical applications for leadership, as well as college students who are just seeking to find their way in life, and parents who want to parent children well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend your book. And
Where do the proceeds go?
the proceeds benefit the teen mission trip to Asheville, North Carolina this summer. Is it North Carolina or South Carolina?
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. The teens are going there this July, and they're helping rebuild after the devastation of the hurricane. So,
Awesome.
Heart of the
Thanks
King.
for the plug.
yeah, absolutely.
Plug. If you need somebody to promote something, Amy is your woman right here.
I'll promote.
If you need a
Promoter. There you go.
So,
All
how's
right.
voting working these
So
days?
we've gone long here. Maybe we should skip over the sprint and just do a couple announcements and call it good
Yeah,
today,
we're
Tim?
not
What
going
do
to
you
sprint
think?
today, and we're
Yeah.
going to not vote on this one
There was
either.
kind
We'll
of a
have
lot
this
of
updated
sprinting.
scoreboard for you all next week, and we'll be back. This is like the end of the All-Star break.
All right.
We're back to being at each other's throats with our book selections next
Sounds
week.
good.
All right. I'll bring my A game next week and see what happens. So, Amy, come back with another book recommendation.
Okay, I will.
So,
Speaking of basketball, Knicks, Pacers, do you guys have a prediction here? It's been a very interesting series. Tonight's the game.
is this
Sorry.
game 7?
No, but it's series is now 2-1. Pacers are winning. And
Okay. Well, we got to root for the Knicks. I mean, it's
Okay.
New York, man.
Well,
New York Knickerbockers.
all right. I'm going with Knicks tonight, Tim.
Knicks in 7.
Whoa. Bold prediction. That was a
All right.
venture prediction.
All about
Ventured
venturing.
into that.
Whatever happens with the Knicks or Pacers, I think the Thunder are going to win. The Thunder are unstoppable. Those guys are crazy.
Oh,
Anyway,
this is in the finals.
Knicks in
we're
5.
only in the conference
Oh,
finals. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Oklahoma Thunder?
Yeah.
Oklahoma City Thunder? All right. Who's the big player on that team?
Shea Gilgeous-Alexander.
What?
Man,
Well, wasn't there
Jim
somebody
is-
before? Who was the big guy before that?
Kevin Durant.
Durant?
But
Durant,
all
yeah.
the
He's been on
famous
9
guys
different
are-
teams
are-
since
are-
he's played for them now.
They're all gone.
All right,
It's
okay.
a whole new crop of
Younger
stars.
Younger folks.
Yeah.
Gen Z people.
Imagine
Yes.
if Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Serge Ibaka all stayed on that team.
Imagine.
Imagine a basketball
Let's
team.
be that team.
Do that.
Anyway,
All right. So
let's get
anyway, what
into
should
the-
we announce here that's coming up?
Let's
Amy,
start
you
with
got a
this
couple
one.
announcements, right?
This
that we should
beautiful
mention here?
graphic.
Well, we have
The
an-
spiritual gifts. There we go. Amy,
All right.
take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the passage in Ephesians 2:10 that talks about we are God's masterpiece, meaning that God has created us individually with our gifts and strengths to serve the church, to serve Him. And if you don't know what your spiritual gift is, I invite you and encourage you and implore you to attend a class that's coming up beginning Sunday, June 8th, to help you discover your spiritual gift and how you can use them to bless the people of God. So, Pastor Dave, I think you're going to be
Gonna be
teaching
great.
that.
We doing the Stephen Ministry one again?
We're going to mix and match some Stephen Ministry stuff, as well as Ken has a spiritual gifts curriculum that he developed, like it's customized.
Oh,
so,
okay. All right.
I have a meeting with him tonight to figure out what we're doing. But it's going to
There
be a
you
great
go.
class.
It's going to be great.
4
Yeah,
weeks in June.
absolutely.
That's how we're going to wrap up these seminars
Yeah.
this semester.
Let's get some people serving out there. What do you think?
Absolutely.
All right. Boom. What else we got up there?
Let's do this one.
Oh,
Amy?
yeah. We are excited that God keeps bringing new people to Millington Baptist Church. And we want to encourage you, if you're considering membership, this is your opportunity. We had a class May 8th, and it was a very full class, but we had people who could not make that class. So this upcoming opportunity is going to be delivered virtually through Zoom. Now's your chance to learn more about Millington Baptist and how you can become a member. So join us, click on the QR code, register, and we'll get you the link. And it's really actually going to be about 2 hours, not 3 hours this time. Right?
Yeah, it'll be a little shorter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's going to be great.
Become a member.
What else, Tim?
This next event is for those who don't feel the need to sign up for things.
Oh.
Nor should they.
Men. June 7th.
We just show up. Well,
We have a breakfast coming up. Be here. Doors open at 7:30. We're going to eat at 8. This theme is kind of new. We're going to talk about the whole blessing of adoption and how that relates to fathers and men, and particularly how that's a window into a certain reality that has been revealed to us about God. A window without which we would not see a certain perspective about God. So this is a really neat men's breakfast topic. We're going to hear from a couple dads who've enjoyed the blessing of adoption. Check it out. June 7th.
And
There you go.
Don Philhauer's famous casseroles will
Don's
be featured
cooking again? All right, there you go.
Yes.
And we're signing books, right? Are we signing books?
We are.
Speaking of books,
Come
yeah,
grab
I
a
think we'll be
book.
there.
Eat from Don's kitchen.
Support the youth mission trip with the book signing.
Support the youth.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of things done on June 7th. It's going to be a great morning.
Very productive.
I can't wait. Hope
Very
to make
productive
it out
morning.
again.
Yes.
Need some more of that casserole. And finally, speaking of men,
Men. Okay,
men,
Radical
men.
Mentoring. 4th season
Mentoring.
is coming up. We're ready to start recruiting. Guys, you've heard about the program. You have seen the graduates. You have been seeing this announcement. And something in your heart is prompting you going, I got to do this. It's time. I'm ready to go a little deeper with the Lord. I'm ready to go a little deeper with some men. Let me jump in to the September Radical Mentoring Group this year. Now's the time. Click on the website, sign up, and we would love to have you join our next mentoring group. It's going to be awesome. You can talk to Bruce Cork if you have any questions about it. Talk to Andy Lynn. Talk to Amit Nihalani. We would love to have you guys jump on to the next round of the Radical Mentoring. Anything else, Amy, on that?
Well, it's not official, but we're looking into a women's radical mentoring
A women's
possibility.
How do they
we
do the
are.
graphic though? That's like strategically positioned to be an M, the RM.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
we'll have
is the
to
women
see.
like a WM? Were they women
Yeah,
mentoring?
that's a good question.
WRM.
Maybe it's a whole
Possibly.
different
radical
bracket.
woman touring.
Yeah.
the woman's right.
All right. And with that, I think we've gone long enough today. Thanks for sticking with us.
You guys want to
on,
guess how long we've gone? I forgot to put the timer up
I
again.
think we've been
Like
at least an hour and a half
My
here, Tim.
stomach
Right?
is
not
definitely
quite an hour and a
telling me
half.
been a
It's
while.
been around an
Make
hour
sure
and
you
15.
make sure you kind of break it up here, Tim, so people know where the different things are.
throw
Hope
in
you
a couple
enjoyed this
intermissions.
episode. Let us know if you got any questions. We'll keep bringing these things up. We're doing all ecclesiology over the last couple months, leading maybe even into the summer, Pastor Dave. So all ecclesiology all the time. That's what we've been doing.
I'm loving it.
We'll see you next week on Behind the Pulpit. Thanks so much for coming, Amy, and maybe Amy will come back next week. We'll see what happens. All right. God bless.